Hi, my name's Diana, and last week at the family meeting, my parents officially cut me off. No warning, no conversation. Just, you're on your own now. They handed my sister the keys to the family legacy while I sat quietly by the pantry door, pretending the roast wasn't cold. But as they raised a glass to their version of success, my assistant called. She said, CEO, your valuation just crossed $150 million, sirs. So here's the question. Would you stay silent or start rewriting the story they tried to end without you? The wind had that sharp edge it only finds in Massachusetts in mid-December. I pulled the collar of my coat up a little higher as I stood in front of the Reddick residence, a 3-story brownstone draped in manicured vines, glowing windows, and old silence. I hadn't parked in the driveway. That was always reserved for real family. I stepped inside, the mahogany door groaning just slightly, and was greeted by the scent of rosemary, burnt sugar, and a whiff of Chanel No. 5. Delphina's signature combination. My heels tapped across the tile, but no one turned. No one said my name. The dining room looked exactly as it had for years. 12 high-backed chairs, linen napkins folded into stiff triangles, gold-rimmed china, and that chandelier. The one Mom said symbolized legacy, even though it mostly symbolized how good she was at blinding people. I hovered near the archway for a beat too long. Then, seeing no invitation, I slid into the only open seat, next to the pantry door. Across from the kitchen entrance, far from the center. "Hey!" a voice piped up. My cousin Brandon, age 14, mouth full of roll. "Are you helping with catering now, or just eating with us today?" I smiled. I was too tired to correct him. Delphina glanced up, then away. Lurleen was holding court across the table, telling some story about her daughter's piano competition. Dad sat beside her, nodding like a trained metronome. My name hadn't been said, and wouldn't be. Not tonight. Plates clattered, servers poured wine. Lurleen wore a navy pantsuit that screamed partner track. I was in black slacks and a cashmere turtleneck that had cost more than my first car, but no one noticed what didn't fit the narrative. "To family," Dad said, raising his glass. "To legacy. To Lurleen, to Arliss, and to those who support us." I kept my glass down. Someone clapped. My hand stayed still. The last time my name had been in one of those toasts, I was 24 and still delusional enough to think I'd earn my place at this table by doing something real. I had presented a prototype then, an AI system that could reduce case research time by 70%. They'd called it cute. They gave Arliss a bonus that quarter. He'd sat in on one client meeting. I looked around the room and noticed something I hadn't before. Not about them, but about me. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was awake. For the first time, I could see how much I'd been trained to shrink. I had been expected to be grateful just to be near proximity to importance. My phone buzzed under the table. I tilted it just enough to read the message from Mavis. "Full valuation confirmed. Doc signed. You're officially cleared for Series C lead." I exhaled through my nose, quiet. Slipped the phone back into my coat pocket. No reaction, no announcement, not yet. Lurleen was telling another story now, this one about being invited to speak at a panel on generational leadership. Delphina beamed, proud as a queen, watching her chosen heir wave to the crowd. I shifted slightly in my seat. The metal leg of my chair clanged against the radiator pipe. No one looked over. I could have burst into flames, and they would have stepped around the ashes. And yet, I sat. I thought about how many times I'd come back here, hoping something would be different. How many versions of me had tried to earn their acknowledgement. The undergrad intern, the law school dropout, the startup founder, the woman who bought her own penthouse and never mentioned it. None of them had worked. That realization wasn't bitter. It was oddly clarifying. If they couldn't see me by now, I was never the one missing. My fork hovered over the salad, but I didn't eat. I studied their faces instead, familiar, composed, slightly bored. And then mine, reflected in the silverware, sharp around the edges, steady, waiting. They toasted to legacy, and still, I sat by the pantry with a name nobody said out loud. The clinking of silverware faded, replaced by murmurs and the soft shuffle of chairs pulling back from the table. I leaned slightly, pretending to fix the hem of my sleeve, just to get a glimpse of the time on my watch. It had been nearly 45 minutes since the toast. My name still hadn't crossed anyone's lips. That's when Delphina stood. She didn't raise her voice, but the room fell quiet anyway. That was her magic. She didn't need volume to command attention, just presence. A glass of Merlot in hand, she smiled the way she did when she was about to turn a decision into a performance. "It's time we discuss legacy succession," she said. Legacy. That word again. I could practically count the number of times it had been weaponized against me. "As of today," she continued, "we're proud to formally announce Lurleen as the next steward of Reddick and Associates. She will hold full oversight of the trust and strategic vision moving forward." A few guests gasped, but not because it was a surprise. It was theater, and we all had our parts. Dad gave a slow nod, like he'd been rehearsing the motion. Lurleen placed her hand on her chest, as if shocked, but her gaze flicked toward Delphina in a way that betrayed the act. A round of applause started. Not enthusiastic, but polite, practiced, like clapping after a long church service you didn't entirely agree with, but needed to respect. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. No one turned toward me. Not even Lurleen. Especially not her. When no one defends you, you stop expecting a defense. You start perfecting the art of not flinching. I reached for my wine glass, but didn't drink. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Again. Same sender, same subject line. Confidential, board approval confirmed. Still, I didn't open it. Instead, I stared at the candle in the center of the table. A tiny flicker, unstable, silent, persistent. I let the screen go dark again, without reading a single word. Let them have this night. I'd take the rest of the decade. A server wheeled in a two-tiered cake decorated with the firm's logo and sugar flowers that matched the Reddick brand palette. No expense spared for appearances. "To the future of the firm," someone said as they placed the cake knife into Lurleen's hand. She made the first cut with a smile so wide it looked sculpted. Her husband ushered their daughters forward for a photo. Delphina joined them at the front, standing slightly off to the side to ensure she was captured in the frame. I watched it all unfold, with a fork still resting on my salad plate. No one asked me to join the picture. There was no space left anyway. Someone behind me muttered under their breath, "She's probably happier doing her little AI startup anyway." I didn't turn around, just smiled softly at my untouched dessert, tapping the side of my glass once with my pinky. A gentle sound. A tiny warning bell, maybe. The night kept going, but I started to feel oddly still, like the room had stopped moving around me. Eventually, the crowd thinned toward the sitting room for coffee and desserts that cost more than some people's rent. I stayed behind. There was nothing sweet left to chew on. Delphina reappeared beside me. She didn't sit, just placed her perfectly manicured hand on my forearm with a touch so gentle it felt strategic. "You understand, don't you?" she asked, voice low and warm. "You never really wanted the firm life." I looked up at her, studied the lines around her mouth, the slight tremble in her knuckles, not from age, from restraint. "It's okay," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "You've given her what she's good at, a title. I'm building something else." She blinked. That wasn't the reaction she expected. There was no resentment in my voice, just resolve. That, to her, was more unsettling. I stood, lifting my half-full wineglass from the ledge and setting it back down without drinking. Then I slipped my coat over my shoulders, the wool scratching lightly at the back of my neck, and walked up the stairs to the guest room Delphina still pretended was mine. As I closed the door behind me, I heard laughter from downstairs. The kind of laughter that only happens when people are certain they've won. That night, they thought they'd written me out of the story. They didn't realize I was already writing a new one. The coffee at the estate was always too weak. I poured half a cup anyway, out of habit more than desire, and stirred it slowly while the last remnants of last night's party were being cleaned up downstairs. My suitcase was already packed and left near the foyer, like I needed the visual confirmation that I still had control over my exit. The car service came 15 minutes earlier than requested. I didn't mind. I needed air, movement, distance. As we pulled away from the estate, I didn't look back. Not out of pride, but because I was afraid I might. By 7:45, I was standing outside the Reddick and Associates boardroom. Early. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because arriving first meant I got to choose how I would be seen. Delphina always said, "Perception is placement." Funny how that only applied when you were trying to look like you belonged. The boardroom was already set, chairs tucked in, name placards carefully laid out in front of each seat. Partner, board member, co-founder. When I finally found mine, it read, Observer, D. Whitmore, not partner, not shareholder, not even consultant, just observer. Like I was there to take notes. I sat without ceremony, letting the silence settle in before the room filled with noise and names I'd memorized since childhood. Lurleen was the last to enter, designer heels tapping across the marble as she carried a thumb drive and a speech already printed in her mind. She opened the meeting with the charm of a local politician, smiling, smooth, calculated. Then she inserted the USB into the screen console, and her voice sharpened as she introduced the video, The Legacy Builders. A slideshow began to play, courtroom shots of Lurleen and Arliss shaking hands with judges, gala events where Delphina stood between senators and CEOs, pro bono campaigns that spun recycled goodwill into magazine covers. And then came the tech segment. It moved fast. Just a few seconds of overlapping images, servers, lines of code, mock-ups of an early AI model, my model. But my name, omitted. My face, blurred in the background of a shot where I'd been presenting at a university law lab. They hadn't just cropped me out. They'd built a world where I never existed. The screen faded to black. Lurleen turned back to the room like she'd just shown everyone a home movie of their brightest moments. Applause came, light but sincere. I didn't move. Diana, Delphina said, walking over with a cream-colored envelope. Just a few housekeeping things we wanted to clean up now that transitions are underway. I took the envelope. Heavy, legal-sized. I didn't open it right away. She kept talking. Starting next quarter, your access to the trust will sunset. We're restructuring some of the support programs too. Your unit under the foundation will be reassigned. The referral network from the alumni group, also shifting. So many polite ways to say, you're cut off. I nodded once, then slid the envelope into my bag without a word. I'm sure you understand, she added with a smile, the kind people use at funerals. You've built your own path. It's time you rely on it fully. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The room spoke for itself. I stayed until the meeting ended. Not out of respect, but out of strategy. When people think you're irrelevant, they speak freely. I watched how they spoke about pivoting to modern tools, how they threw around my concepts with buzzwords I'd written into a deck 3 years ago. And then I walked out slowly, past the reception, past the mural of my grandfather shaking hands with the governor back in the 70s, past the polished plaque listing all the senior partners, none of whom had ever once asked me what I was building. Back in the parking garage, I sat in my car and finally opened the envelope. It was as she said, formal notice that my financial ties to the Reddick estate were being severed. No more support, no more space, no more safety net, and no explanation that wouldn't look petty in print. I folded the pages neatly. I didn't rip them, didn't cry, didn't react. I'd already lost the seat. What hurt was realizing the seat had never been mine in the first place. I thought of that summer when I was 16, Watching Delphina spend 2 weeks crafting Lurlene's college recommendation letter. Watching her pause mid-sentence to say, "Your sister doesn't just follow rules, she defines them." I'd believed then that my time would come. Now I knew better. Legacy wasn't passed down in this family. It was decided in closed rooms before you ever stepped inside. I reached for my phone. Not to call anyone, just to open the tribute video I had made, the one I'd almost sent. It sat in my drafts, quiet and untouched. I never sent it. I never will. Instead, I opened another folder, the one labeled Launch Deck, Final. It contained the real blueprint, the pitch that would build something bigger than a seat at someone else's table. My thumb hovered over Send to Board. They deleted me from their story, so I decided to become too big to be edited out again. The email sat in my drafts overnight. I didn't send it, not yet. Instead, I spent the next 2 days doing exactly what they thought I'd never do. Wait. Not out of fear, but precision. If you fire too early, they call it impulsive. Fire too late, they call it weak. But if you time it right, well, that's when the silence hits hardest. By Wednesday morning, I was back at Reddick & Associates. Not for closure, not for reconciliation, just confirmation. Mavis had mentioned something in passing, a loose thread that tugged at me. A legacy partners luncheon, nothing formal. But they might show the government prototype deck, she'd said. So I walked in through the side entrance. My badge still worked. Oversight or arrogance, I didn't know which. Upstairs, the briefing room buzzed with soft chatter. Silver platters lined the back table, untouched. Suits gathered near the projection screen, nursing coffees and pretending not to notice me. On the center of the table sat a thick packet, printed and bound, titled GovTech AI, Public Integration Rollout. I picked it up, leafing slowly through the pages like I wasn't scanning every word with the speed of a machine. Diagrams, process flow, even the data structure schema I had hand-sketched on a whiteboard over a year ago. Word for word. Bullet for bullet. Except now, my name wasn't on it. Not even in the footnotes. "Isn't it beautiful?" Lurlene's voice came from behind me. I turned just enough to face her, packet still in hand. "Impressive formatting," I said, "but it seems to be missing attribution." She tilted her head like I'd just offered her a compliment wrapped in sarcasm. "You left it on the server, Diana," she replied with that voice she always used when she thought she was smarter. "No NDA, no trademark. You of all people should know better." I smiled, soft and measured. "I do. That's why I'm giving you a chance to walk it back before it becomes public record." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "It's public domain." "No," I said, stepping in closer. "It's traceable. And I hope you understand the definition of chain of custody." She held her gaze for a moment, then scoffed and turned away. Behind her, through the glass wall of the adjacent meeting room, I spotted Delphina, sitting with none other than Silas Dorrance, the same man who'd once offered to buy my system 3 years ago. She was smiling. He was holding a copy of the same deck in his hands. My stomach didn't drop. My heart didn't pound. I didn't feel blindsided or shocked, because deep down, I knew they hadn't just erased me. They were selling what I built. I walked away from the packet and slipped into an empty side office, closed the door behind me, and opened my laptop. The signal was weak, but the cloud loaded slowly enough to make me feel like it was fighting for me. I opened a folder named Proof of Originality, timestamped diagrams, version history, Slack conversations, devlogs, all mine, all legal. Then I started a draft. To silasdorrancegroup.com, subject, Notice of Intent to Enforce IP. No need for fluff. No need for explanation, just a declaration. I didn't hit send, not yet. There was still one move left to make. On the drive back to my office, I stopped at a gas station. Not because I needed fuel, but because I needed a moment to recalibrate. I stood there, watching as the pump ticked upward, thinking about how many hours I'd spent defending myself in rooms full of people who weren't even listening. Not this time. Back at my building, I walked into my office. Mavis stood up immediately. "I forwarded that calendar invite like you asked," she said. "It's today, in about 2 hours. Delphina and Silas are meeting again. The system architecture is on the agenda." I nodded once. "Thank you." Then I sat down, opened a new message, and addressed it to both Delphina and Lurleen. Subject: Internal Notice, IP Use and Digital Copy Reference. Attached, 1 PDF, dated, timestamped, a receipt with Delphina's initials from the day I demoed the original model. At the bottom, this concept remains internal property of Diana Whitmore until otherwise licensed. In the body, I wrote only one line. You have 48 hours to retract the unauthorized usage before legal counsel is notified. No threats, no emotion, just fact. I hit send, then powered off my phone. No pings, no replies, no explanations. Let them panic in the quiet. They wanted to build an empire with my blueprints. I was about to remind them who drew the lines. The silence after hitting send lingered longer than I expected. Not the kind of silence that comes with uncertainty, but the kind that fills a room before the storm hits. 2 days later, I received an invitation. Formal, embossed, wrapped in layered politeness. Executive lunch to honor Lurleen Cassano, it said, recognizing her strategic vision in leading the firm's upcoming tech roadmap. I read it twice before laughing. Strategic vision, that was rich. I didn't RSVP, I showed up. The luncheon was hosted at one of the private dining floors in a midtown tower Reddick and Associates like to call their client-facing space. Translation: the pretty place they paraded partners in front of hedge fund reps and politicians. I arrived just after noon. Mavis had confirmed the start time, and I had no interest in small talk over cocktails. Inside, the lights were soft, the room dressed in warm golds and deep reds. Servers glided like chess pieces, placing wine glasses with calculated grace. At the head of the table sat Lurleen, postured, smiling, every inch the newly anointed visionary. My place card was buried near the far end. I didn't need to read it to know where they'd put me, but what I did notice was the folder, thick, sealed, sitting directly on my plate like a quiet dare. Every other place setting had a menu. Mine had this. I took my seat, didn't touch the wine, didn't open the folder right away, let it breathe, let them believe they were still directing the room. Delphina stood and cleared her throat. Again, that theater voice she used when she wanted everyone to believe they were lucky just to be in her presence. "We're incredibly proud of what the next phase means for Reddick and Associates," she began. "This moment marks a bridge between our legacy and the future. And it's only fitting that someone with a clear understanding of both should lead us forward." She didn't say Lurleen's name outright. She didn't have to. The way the guests turned their eyes toward her, the subtle nods, the way the photographer from Boston Business Review focused his lens, that said it all. I opened the folder. My fingers worked slowly through the pages, flipping past the introductory fluff, past the partner names. There it was. Draft agreement, unsigned but nearly complete. Between Reddick and Associates and Dorrance Strategic Capital, the same Silas Dorrance I saw Delphina courting last week. Buried in the proposal language, AI infrastructure developed under internal strategic initiative to be integrated into core product offerings. No acknowledgement of author, no licensing reference, no audit trail, just stripped down legal language repurposing everything I had built. They weren't just going to pitch it, they were going to sell it, while I sat 5 feet away. The chicken was served. I didn't touch mine. I slid the folder into my tote bag and folded the flap over it as if I were just tidying up. No one noticed. Or if they did, they were smart enough not to make eye contact. For the rest of lunch, I let the conversation wash past me. Policy reform, new corporate clients, champagne raises. I nodded occasionally, gave small smiles when appropriate. Meanwhile, beneath the table, I opened my phone and scheduled a confidential meeting with our legal counsel for that evening. "You don't scream during war," I reminded myself. tapping the calendar app shut. You document. The plates cleared, desserts passed, toasts made. Not one addressed me. Not one guest said my name out loud. That was fine. My silence was no longer theirs to control. As the room began to thin out, Delphina made her way over. She moved slowly, like she was approaching a friend, but preparing for a headline. "I hope you're not taking this personally," she said, eyes soft, lips folded into a half smile. I tilted my head just slightly, like I was studying the wording of a clause I'd already decided to reject. "Only legally," I replied. She chuckled, short, forced. "Come on, Diana, you wouldn't risk family for pride." I stood, steady, smiled back. "No, I'm risking my silence, which has expired." Delphina blinked, the line landing heavier than she anticipated. She opened her mouth as if to answer, but nothing came out. A rare thing for her. I didn't wait. Back in my car, parked 3 levels below ground, I closed the door and sat in the quiet. I called Mavis before turning the ignition. "Pull everything," I said. "Time-stamped repository, source code backups, the NDA logbook, all of it. I want every version from alpha to final." She didn't ask why. She just replied, "I'm already on it." As the elevator whined its way back up to street level, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, not checking for makeup, just confirmation. They thought I wouldn't risk exposure, but I'd already survived erasure. 2 nights had passed since the lunch at Midtown, the kind where no one eats, no one listens, and everyone pretends they aren't reading each other's moves like cards face up on a table. Back in my office, the windows were dark, the city beyond them humming like a thing alive. I sat cross-legged on the couch across from my desk, sipping mint tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The legal documents I'd requested were spread across the floor like puzzle pieces I no longer had to guess at. My phone buzzed against the armrest. "Mavis." Subject line, "You need to see this." Now. Attached. Screenshot. I opened it. At first, it looked like any group text. 4 names, a gray background, small text. Then I saw it. Delphina. Lurleen. Arliss. And in the thread, "Honestly, let her try. She won't sue. She still thinks this is family. Her code isn't even registered under her LLC. Rookie mistake. I checked. No formal NDA from 21. She's running off fumes." They weren't whispering anymore. They weren't even hiding. They were bold, certain, cruel. That last line hit hardest. Not because they thought I'd made a mistake, but because they assumed I was still trying to be accepted. I wasn't. I forwarded the message to my secure archive, then clicked into our firm's internal compliance system. It took less than a minute to confirm. They were wrong. When I left Reddick and Associates, I'd scrubbed every trail, except the one I intentionally left buried. A clause, a timestamp, a tiny gap in the system log that proved I had never signed their standard non-compete. I had reviewed it. I had declined. There was even an internal note from HR flagging the discrepancy. I found it within minutes. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the seconds between each breath. It wasn't vindication, not yet. It was structure, and it was mine. They were betting on silence, I said out loud, not structure. Later that evening, I pulled up a clean document, simple header, formal tone. Subject, notice of retained rights body. A reminder that any usage of Diana Whitmore originated assets without contract approval constitutes IP infringement under both Massachusetts commercial law and federal statute. I didn't hit send, not yet. Instead, I called a team meeting. No calendar invite, no agenda. Just 5 people who'd built my company with me. 2 lawyers, 1 developer, Mavis, and our PR lead. They showed up in sweats and ball caps, tired but curious. We met in the back room of our office, not the main conference room, not the polished investor space, the room with mismatched chairs and cables running along the walls. I outlined the situation. I showed them the documents. I read the chat transcript without blinking. "Are you ready for this?" one of the lawyers asked. I nodded once. I don't want a fight, I said. I want a record, that's all. We spent 2 hours mapping out contingencies, drafting press strategy, preparing litigation options, but softly, quietly, so as not to start a war no one could control. By midnight, the plans were in motion. Before leaving, I checked my phone one last time. A new text from Lurleen. You're pushing too far. Don't do something you can't undo. I didn't hesitate. I took a screenshot of the chat they thought I'd never see and replied with one line. This? You already did. Then I blocked the number. There's something final in that kind of silence. Not angry, not afraid, just done. I returned to my office, shut off the lights, and sat for a moment in the dark. No music, no screen glow, just the click of the building's HVAC switching on for the night. I pulled out the leather-bound journal I kept in the bottom drawer, the one I used for decisions that would alter everything. And I wrote, I've waited a decade to be quiet. Now I'll speak exactly once, and they'll never forget it. I closed the book. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel triumph. I felt ready. They counted on my silence. But silence isn't the same as surrender. Morning arrived slower than usual. I woke before my alarm, already dressed in my mind. By the time I zipped my coat and stepped out into the cold, the frost hadn't yet melted from the sidewalks, but my steps felt certain. My car service dropped me off a block from the Reddick Tower. I asked them to let me walk the rest of the way. Some things deserved an entrance that couldn't be missed, but without being announced. By 9:07 a.m., I was seated in the boardroom. The quarterly financial meeting had drawn every major partner, shareholder, and family figure into one room. Leather chairs, chrome pens, bottled water with the label turned outward, as if branding still mattered more than truth. Delphina stood at the far end of the table, mid-sentence, confidently weaving through a speech about streamlining innovation and future-proofing the firm. It was the same language I'd once drafted for a completely different purpose. Her voice didn't falter when I entered, but her eyes flicked toward me, just once. I didn't take the seat labeled for guests. I stood near the side wall, hands folded. I didn't need proximity to power. I'd brought my own. The moment came 5 minutes in. My phone rang, not vibrated. Rang, loud, deliberate, cutting through her words like a string snapping inside a piano. Every head turned. Delphina stopped speaking, mid-syllable. I pulled the phone from my coat pocket and didn't even look at the screen before answering. Ms. Whitmore, Mavis's voice came through, clear and steady. Your company valuation hit $150 million this morning. Bloomberg confirmed it. Reuters is requesting a comment. CNBC has your name on the morning market roundup. You could have heard a pin drop. Lurleen's pen fell from her hand and rolled across the glass table. Arliss leaned back, visibly confused. A junior partner to my left looked like she'd swallowed her breath. Delphina's face didn't change, at least, not enough for anyone but me to notice. Her fingers tensed slightly against the edge of the podium. I kept the phone to my ear for 1 extra second, then spoke. Thank you, Mavis. That'll be all. And I ended the call. The silence in the room didn't break. It cracked. I stepped forward, reached into my folder, and placed a printed document on the center of the table, facing Delphina. This, I said calmly, is a payment receipt made 3 weeks ago from Reddick and Associates to Silas Dorrance, labeled Consulting, AI Architecture Prototype Acquisition. I tapped the top of the page gently, which means this firm knowingly used technology it didn't own, paid for it through a third-party shell, and listed it in your investor briefings as proprietary innovation. No one moved. I looked around the room slowly, pausing on each face. And for the record, that prototype was mine, developed outside this firm, logged, time-stamped, and protected. You didn't just misrepresent the origin. You laundered authorship. Lurleen opened her mouth like she was about to object, but no sound came out. A junior associate near the end of the table muttered, "Wait, This whole pitch, it's hers? I didn't answer him directly. I didn't need to. I don't need a seat at this table, I said, keeping my voice even. I built my own, but I won't let you staple my name to a legacy that tried to write me out. I took out my phone, opened an already prepared press release draft, and pressed send. To all legal tech media outlets, the subject line read. The room erupted, not in noise, but in panic disguised as silence. Delphina stepped back slightly. Lurleen whispered something, sharp and frantic, into her ear. I caught only the end of it. She's going to ruin everything. Delphina's jaw tightened. She already has. I watched as the implications sank in, each person recalculating their association, their exposure, their future. I didn't yell, I didn't gloat. I stood quietly, the same way they had once tried to make me disappear. But this time, they were the ones shrinking. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity, like finally letting go of the weight they made me carry. After the boardroom confrontation, I didn't go home. I didn't want quiet. I needed motion. The air outside tasted metallic, the way winter always does, right before snow. My driver took me straight to the State Bar Association building in Beacon Hill, where the Legal Innovation Summit was already underway. I was never invited, at least not officially, but I didn't need an invite anymore. Inside, the energy buzzed with performative innovation. Law firms desperate to look progressive, tech vendors slinging tools no one really understood, and executives still clinging to their titles like shields. Lurleen and Delphina were scheduled to speak on a panel titled Bridging the Legal Gap Through Technology. Irony wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. I waited backstage. The concrete walls smelled of old coffee and dry paint, a familiar backstage scent that reminded me of every moment I was told to wait my turn. But I wasn't alone this time. Mavis stood beside me, crisp blazer, no expression. You ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. A stagehand waved to signal it was time. Mavis went first. She stepped onto the platform with quiet force. There was no announcement, no fanfare, just her voice through the mic, clear, sharp, and surgical. My name is Mavis Lynn, she began, Operations Director, Legal AI Systems, and I'm here to speak not just about innovation, but about integrity. The murmurs died fast. As a former employee of Reddick and Associates, I witnessed firsthand how contributions made by Diana Whitmore were systematically excluded, minimized, and, when useful, repurposed without credit or consent. The room stilled. Journalists stopped typing. Phones lifted. Lurleen, seated across the room, froze. Delphina reached for the water beside her, but her hand trembled slightly. I left that firm, Mavis continued, because I knew what silence cost, and I refused to be part of it anymore. Applause didn't break immediately. People weren't sure if they were allowed to react. That's how power operates. It teaches even decency to ask for permission. I stepped onto the stage next. There was a panel set up, 6 chairs in a row. 5 had name placards. Mine was blank. The moderator looked sheepish. I'm so sorry, Ms. Whitmore. I think there was a printing issue. I waved it off. It's all right, I said, taking my seat. I've been here before without a name. A few chuckles. More than that. Nods. Recognition. People understood. The panel began. Delphina tried to steer the conversation back to buzzwords. Collaboration, interdisciplinary synergy, firm-wide transformation. She threw words like confetti, hoping no one noticed the mess they were meant to cover. But the questions came fast. Ms. Whitmore, do you believe firms can evolve without addressing legacy inequities? Yes, I said, but only if they stop treating the past as sacred and start treating it as data. If your system excluded people by design, that's not heritage, that's a bug. Someone in the front row clapped. I continued, never once looking at Delphina. Innovation doesn't mean speed. It means accuracy and integrity. And sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is tell the truth in a room that's paid not to hear it. No one interrupted. No one dared. After the panel, people approached me. Not with pity, not with politics, but with interest. One man, suit pressed and breath mint fresh, handed me his card. "Federal legal systems," it read. "We'd like to talk." Behind me, I heard Lurlene's voice, tight, low. "What do you mean the deal's off?" I turned slightly. She was on her phone, pacing. Her tone got sharper. "You told me it was a done deal. You said she couldn't touch us." I met her eyes as I walked past, held them just long enough to speak without raising my voice. "I don't need the chair," I said. "I built the building." She didn't follow. She didn't call out. She just watched me go. I stepped into the hallway and breathed. That was the moment I realized. I had never wanted their table. I wanted the truth to outlive them. They removed my name from the plaque, but now the doors open when I walk in. By the time I stepped off the elevator and into my apartment, the sun had barely touched the surface of the Charles. The skyline blinked awake one office light at a time. I slipped off my shoes by the door, walked barefoot to the kitchen, and set the kettle on without thinking. It was 6:08 a.m. when my phone buzzed. I didn't rush to check it. Instead, I waited for the water to boil, poured it over a bag of Earl Grey, and let it steep while the screen stayed face down on the counter. Only after the first sip did I turn it over. Subject line: Official notice. Controlling shareholder transfer complete. I stared at it for a few moments, then clicked it open. It was from the investment bank, confirming what had already been in motion. The final documents had been filed. The platform, the one they'd tried to bury, was now mine, officially, uncontestably, permanently. I didn't forward the email, didn't screenshot it, didn't even smile. I just stood by the window and looked out across the water. It was quiet in that rare, reverent way Boston manages just before traffic rises and phones start buzzing for real. I watched the rowers glide by like silent promises, their strokes even and deliberate. Downstairs, the front desk called to tell me I had a visitor. Delphina. I didn't ask why she was there. I just told them to let her up. She walked in without a coat, like she'd left in a hurry. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor, pausing just past the entryway, as if uncertain whether she was welcome. She looked smaller in the morning light. "Coffee?" I asked, motioning toward the counter. She nodded once, then sat on the edge of the armchair across from me, like she wasn't sure how to be in that room. In my space. In something I'd built without her. "I read the article," she said finally. "They called you the architect of disruption." I raised an eyebrow. "They didn't mean it as a compliment," she added. "They never do when it's a woman." She exhaled through her nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "I didn't know," she said, eyes fixed on the table between us. "No," I replied quietly. "You chose not to know." She looked up at me then. Her eyes were glassy, but she blinked the moisture back. She wouldn't cry, not here. "Your father," she began. He couldn't watch the press conference. He stayed in his office. He's not well." I stirred my tea slowly. "He's been fine watching me fail." That landed hard. She didn't argue. The room settled into something thick and uncertain. Then I did what neither of us expected. I got up and poured her a cup. Black, no sugar, just the way she drank it. I handed it to her like a truce with boundaries. "I don't hate you," I said. "I just stopped waiting to be understood." She held the cup but didn't drink. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "Do you ever think about coming back?" she asked. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just looked her in the eye and answered plainly. "You burned that bridge so thoroughly, it fertilized my ambition." That time, she didn't flinch. She nodded, almost respectfully, then stood up and set the coffee down, still untouched. "I should go," she said. "You should." She walked to the door, but paused before leaving. "You've built something, real, she said, turning halfway back. I suppose that's what legacy looks like now. No, I said. That's what healing looks like. After she left, the silence wasn't bitter. It wasn't lonely. It was mine. Later that afternoon, I returned to the office. No balloons, no banners. Just soft nods from the team. Quiet claps. The kind of applause that doesn't need to be loud to carry weight. Mavis left a note on my desk, scrawled in her usual fast print. You taught me how to not ask for permission to belong. I folded it once and slipped it into my journal. We had meetings. There were investor calls. But in between, I opened the company's homepage editor. No announcement, no press alert, just a single change. Right below the logo, I typed, built by those who were never meant to lead. Until we did. Then I clicked save. Not to mark victory, to mark presence. They cut me off to control the ending. I became the author instead. And sometimes, healing means walking away, without needing to slam the door.